also would like to welcome one more time our excellent panelists. And I hope the discussion today will be very interesting. And I welcome also all participants to post their questions during the panel discussion. So maybe before we go into the questions, I would like to just tell you a bit about the structure. So in the first part of the panel discussion, I would ask questions to our panelists, and then in the second part, you will be welcome to ask questions, and you can either raise your hand, put a question into the chat, or you can actually unmute yourself and then ask a question directly. Then I will have first, of course, all of you traveled into the other countries, and I think some of our panelists also moved from one country to another and back. And as we know, so culture shock refers to a feeling of uncertainty, confusion, or anxiety that people may experience when moving to a new country or experiencing a new culture or surroundings. This cultural adjustment is normal and is the result of being in unfamiliar environment. So I have a question to all of you, and maybe firstly I would like to ask Marlena to start with her answer. And the question is, what are the biggest differences you noticed when you arrived in the USA? I assume that was the first country when you moved to, and what you noticed after a while.
I was born in Poland, and actually first country I went to when I was 18 years old, I went to France.
Oh, okay.
Yes, when I was 19, I came to the United States. I think that I have a culture shock. I think in France, like I didn't know what to expect as a young person. I knew French a little bit, but I wasn't like too good at it. It's a bit different when you study, when you learn language at school, and when you actually go to the country and you have to use it, right? I was getting good grades, learning French at school in Poland, but in France was actually a disaster for a month. So when I came to the United States a year later, I didn't have too big expectations, and I knew it's going to take a while for me to adjust, right? So I think the biggest challenge was that I thought I would adjust quicker, faster, and it didn't happen. But coming to the United States as a second foreign country, I just gave myself a space to adjust.
Okay. And how old were you when you moved from France to United States?
I was 19.
Okay, so it was just 1 year after. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the culture? Differences. Did you notice something specific? I don't know, about people, about the social contacts.
You know what? I think that Poland, France, the United States are. We're using different language, but we have very similar culture. I think that I have been thinking about it, that if I move to China or Morocco, that would be like a much bigger shock for me. But that moving from Europe to the United States, we still have very similar overall culture, I think.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Tomasz, how about you? What are the biggest differences you noticed? You were born in the States, right? Or
no, actually, I was born in Poland, but I came to the U.S. I grew up in the U.S. basically. I'm one of the generation 1.5 people that are sort of living in two worlds simultaneously, and so for me, it's interesting because both worlds were like familiar since childhood, and in a way, you're straddling both worlds at the same time, and so both are equally normal. But I guess, kind of agreeing with what Marlena said, there are differences, but they're more subtle. It's not something that makes you feel completely out of control or completely anxious, but you certainly notice. One of the biggest things about Poland, for example, when I went for my Fulbright year, was just the difference that people just the way that they behaved, even on the street or in the tram, or there's just a little bit less sort of mask of happiness that we sort of put on here in the United States. That's not necessarily so common there. And also, when you ask somebody how they're doing, they may not actually say, "Oh, I'm doing fine," or "I'm good," well, whatever. They might actually tell you how they're feeling, and that's pretty uncommon, I would say, in the U.S. But in terms of my experience, and maybe this is jumping the gun a little bit on some of the things we might be talking about later, but being in music, it's a very international business to begin with, and so there's a mutual understanding there to begin with, and so it kind of smooths the way over any small cultural differences that we might experience. Now, from a teaching point of view, I can tell you that certainly, like some of my Asian students that I've taught over the years that have moved here, especially later in life, like just for university, the first few years for them were tough, especially the language barrier, and some of those issues, just communicating the formality with which they're used to communicating, for example, with professors or their superiors. It was very shocking to them. So there were many conversations I've had with students about this over the years.
Yes, I can imagine, right, that their culture is a little bit closed, and then they're maybe not that open to discuss, and you have to find a way to get to them when you are especially doing teaching, right, just to see whether they're feeling confident about it, and or whether they have any questions, right? So totally agree with that. And Martin, what about you? You've been in Canada, but definitely you traveled, and maybe you stayed in some places also within your career, and what are the differences that you see or maybe don't see? I think you're mute.
Okay. I was born in Poland, so I can speak to both. To me, culture shock is a bit of a culture surprise and culture disappointment. Surprise in the sense that, for example, here they say pants instead of trousers, and that's a bit of a surprise. And I realized as a form of disappointment that Canadians just don't know how to make bread in the same way that the Polish bakers do. But what rescues this kind of conflict, and to Tomasz's point about how music offers a mutual understanding, is that, in science, it's a language that we share, and moreover, we share the same questions. But moreover, we're looking for the same answers as scientists everywhere in the world, as opposed to culturally, where we're also asking the same questions, but we're actually seeking different answers, and everybody's answer is very different. So I think I have, more in common probably with the average Canadian physicist, mathematician, scientist / whoever, than I would necessarily with the average person born in the place of my birth, which of course makes it a very interesting dichotomy.
Mm. Okay, interesting. Okay, so then you a little bit started my second question, actually. So yeah, I mean, I see you didn't have a culture shock. I mean, maybe in some parts, yes, it's just difficult and different. But what about science and arts, right? So do you think this is also the case of world of arts and world of science, that these cultures are different, or there are actually similarities? So maybe Martin, you can go ahead and continue.
Well, there are profound similarities, because science is a pursuit of understanding the physical world around us. And in a way, art is the pursuit of understanding our internal world. And in that pursuit, I would say that there's almost no truth there. There is a personal experience of that journey. And so what makes these two topics incredibly interesting, as science and art, is that they allow us to sit together and have a common point of connection, which is the science part, because it's likely that the answer that I come up with, if it's sound and valid, will be shared by scientists everywhere. And then we could have this interesting conversation about culture, where the answers I come up with are completely different from yours, but I nevertheless want to know what your answers are and what your path to those answers are. And that kind of enriches my own process of finding them. So we're lucky in being able to engage in both.
Well, Tomasz, how about you?
Well, I guess I have some similar thoughts to Martin, except I direct them more at the art side than he does than he does to art, and kind of flipping it around in a way. Because to me, actually, it's the arts where you can more successfully communicate, whether or not you're necessarily on the same page, seeking the same goal. Is maybe a secondary concern, actually, because the communication actually happens in the world of humanities and the arts. That's where language lives. That's where communication lives. And I don't know that, I have some serious questions about maybe this idealized view of science, being this pure kind of endeavor, right? And so there are some philosophical questions about that, that we could be raising as well. But, say we accept this premise, right, that it is, in fact, the only sphere of objectivity, right? And I don't actually agree with that, because I think that we might be able to find some truth in some other places as well, not just in science itself. But, even if we say that that's the case, I think, art gives us the space to at least communicate about it, whatever truth is in this instance. So without going perhaps into a discussion about philosophy here, I would say that music and art can give us some tools to communicate our internal reality. How about that?
Okay. Interesting, very interesting. And Marlena, so you are actually working quite a lot with scientists, right? And trying to come up with the best visual expression of their discoveries, data and science, right? So how difficult that is? I mean, what are the challenges that you basically see in it? Is it always so straightforward, or is it actually really quite challenging to get there, and what they expect you actually to visualize?
It's a very fun challenge. I love what I'm doing. I have been doing science illustrations for a while. My background is in arts and architecture. I have never studied science, so coming to science field, it's a totally new field for me. But I can use the existing patterns that I know from arts, from visual arts, and also from architecture, and I can apply that in science language. And I see it as a pattern. I'm just discovering the language in science, and I'm converting that into visual image. The projects that I have been working on, they're a little bit different. I've been working on a project where I have to do science illustrations for a book, which is more straightforward, but on certain occasions, I have an opportunity to have more fun with it and use scientific data, informations, and research, and create a new body of work that is based on the science, but is giving me more freedom to express myself as well. And I have done a quite creative project with astrophysics department at Harvard University and MIT as well. The projects that I'm working on together with David Hewitt, who is a composer, music composer, we show the work at the Museum of Science. We have exhibitions at the Museum of Science of Boston in Colorado. So we have quite amazing and fruitful collaborations between scientists and me as an artist and musicians. And we share the projects with with public. I also create a lot of workshops, especially for kids, because I believe kids are amazing and they're like little sponges and they're very open to different ideas. They're open to learn about science, but also express themselves artistically and visually. Yeah.
Okay, Carol, thank you very much. And Martin, you are actually a scientist, right? And then you are actually
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then you are actually converting science into an art, right? Could you give us just an example? I mean, when you make this decision that you want to do this, you want to convert science into art, what drove you to this?
Yeah. That's a great question, and the answer I give you today I agree with, and I might give you a totally different answer tomorrow. I never made the decision. I think it just kind of happened very slowly, and I think it happened both within the field of science and independently. And I moved from physics to biology, and I find biology very confusing. And in a way, it's like a scary dark forest where everything is different all the time. Even if you tell me these two things are the same, they're actually different. Whereas in the world of physics, it's quite the opposite. You know, we're trying to find all the ways in which everything is really the same with supersymmetry and things like that. And so I try to find better ways to explain biology to myself. And I was looking at these visual explanations, because who has time to read the text? You just look at the figures. You look at the figures and they're just horrid. And so I thought, well, but surely these can be fixed. And I found that process was therapeutic. It helped me deal with biology a little bit. But I found that on the side, I was able to actually clean things up a bit and use notions of design and use notions of that desire for simplicity that I was trained in somewhere else to improve the work. So this is something that I do quite a lot of. And then to speak to Marlena's point, the expression, the artistic expression of how I respond to what I learn in science is very important. It's that subjective reaction to the objective truth that you've discovered or you have some certainty about. And that is my only way that I can actually participate as myself in the scientific process, because science moves forward and it accumulates knowledge regardless of whether they're human brains that are alive. This knowledge is right. It's about the universe. It's independent of us. So then how do we fit in? How can we take part of this as the complicated creatures that we are? And so the science lets me kind of have that personal reaction of surprise, of wonder, of making connections between concepts and poetry and things like this. So I think it's a full cycle and best done when it's kind of repeated.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. Thank you so much. And I see that we have Jose.
So Stinelli texting you. I'm so sorry. I got mixed up with the time difference. I had it from 3:30, and now I realize you were on Virginia time, right?
Welcome. We started with some questions, but it's great to have you back. And you were actually introduced because Vanessa believed that this is just, a small mistake, which I think all of us made. So no worries. Welcome. Yeah. And yes, so it's great to have you here. We were just, talking about different cultures, cultural shock or not shock as it appears. All the panelists actually admitted that there's maybe not such a shock, but there are lots of actually similarities, at least between Poland, United States, and so maybe then we could go to question to you. I mean, you are coming from Spain, right? You left Spain when you were actually after your studies, and so what was basically the most, I would say, challenging thing when you arrived to the States for you as a Spanish coming to the States?
Well, yeah, I mean, the beginning, it was the first difference in the city. Dallas is a very extended city. You need to drive everywhere. Barcelona is very crowded. So just getting used to walk everywhere instead of, to drive everywhere instead of, that was a first shock. but also with the people, with American people, I don't want to sound as a criticism because, but I noticed many differences, actually. I think they were more private. I think we Europeans more used to socialize. Here, many people at 18, they go away from the family. They go as far as possible to get independent. So there were several things that I noticed. And I also noticed then that other people from Europe, Germans, French, I didn't know any Polish at that moment, they were much more similar to me than I expected in compared with the Americans. But on the other hand, there is a fantastic thing that I saw in America is that they were so welcoming of us, of everybody, of all kinds. You know, people can talk about racism in America and it's a horrible problem. It's a horrible problem, but for some people, right? Because in general, this is really by far, I think, the country that is more welcoming to foreigners. And I've been 32 years and I cannot be more thankful to America for that.
Great. And while being in America, do you consider yourself as an ambassador of Spanish culture in the USA?
Not too much. I mean, with the people around me, yes, but I haven't done too much in terms of trying to promote my culture. Just, telling all the people I know, of course, I tell them about our wonderful food and about Catalonia versus Spain, which I feel very much both Spanish and Catalonian. Yes,
I do have some friends there as well, and they say the same thing. So yes, great. Then I would then move to a question that I have for actually Tomasz. You are actually you are an artist, I think. Very, I would say, established one already for your young age. And do you think that researchers, scientists have a role actually in shaping artistic development on the border of world of culture? And if yes, how? And if not, why?
Yeah, no, I do think so. And I mean, it would be silly to say no, given that Martin and Marlena here are actually doing exactly that. There's a need, obviously, for processing of information, right? And some of that has to, again, deal with language and visual art, plastic art, things like that. Just creating the model of DNA, for example, was a huge revolution in science, and just having the visual power of some of those things has obviously helped science. And then do scientists help the arts? I think they do. The most obvious example is music technology. Right now, obviously music production, music technology, new means of sharing. That's also part of creating new media that you can use in plastic arts, new technologies for painting and creating in the performing arts, all kinds of stage technology that you can utilize all of a sudden. So really science, more on the side of technology, can shape the arts that way, sort of. And then, directly through research, there are projects that try to do some very cool things using science. For example, I have a friend who's doing research about the early recordings of the famous tenor Enrico Caruso, and trying to use basically sound analysis, spectral analysis, to figure out some questions about performance practice from 100 years ago and how he actually sang, and whether some of the things that we hear might have been misunderstood or misrepresented because of basically the issues associated with the transfer medium. So there are these kinds of scientific questions that are very direct, and I think the most obvious one could be the coronavirus study that was done by Colorado scientists to try to kind of figure out how many particles are being ejected, I suppose, when you're playing, for example, wind instruments or singing, and trying to see if we can have a safe enough environment where performances can continue. And that's where, without science, we wouldn't have had any of that information. So certainly science can and does shape artistic development.
Very good, very good. Very nice question, answer. Thank you so much. Jose, then I have a question actually to you. So, I mean, as we are here, you know, at the art and the arts meets science, right? Ramon Cajal, right? He was one of the first ones that actually, thanks to him, we know how the neurons looks like. And I was just thinking, if you know any more examples of that, and maybe extrapolate. I mean, for me, for example, this was really impressive and important that back in the days, without technology, without anything, we had an artist who drew that and was able to actually start this maybe intersection of science and art, because this was just his drawings are just beautiful. I'm a scientist, but I cannot draw.
Well, in my case, I have an identical twin who actually maybe trying to connect right now. If you see some other Rizo trying to connect, please accept him. So he looks very much like me, and he's an artist. So we had very similar. When we were little, we were very similar. Both were good at math, but also with drawing, and completely diverse. And I talked a lot about this, and I was telling him yesterday about this colloquium, and it's amazing that he came up with the same ideas. I jotted down a couple of ideas, and he came up with exactly the same idea. So it's kind of spooky, I guess, at least because we are twins, right? But my brother is a scientist of art. He does super realism. You know, he does this painting. Everybody says a picture is much more than a picture, because he puts all the details, the pores of the skin, the hair, you know, and he's basically developed all this by himself. So he's been developing different techniques. So he uses the white of the wood is the white, because it's the most white thing he can find, more white than any ink or any. So then he uses the eraser, the electrical rubber eraser, to remove everything, and then the most shiny thing is the wood that is below. Yeah, that's just an example of many things. So he's really been an amazing scientist in that sense. But of course, the whole idea of creation and of development of ideas is something that happened both in art and science a lot. And Robak said that he felt like science and art science and art are very related, even if it's just because in both cases you have the experimental choice. It doesn't mean they are the same thing, but of course there are many points in common.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very well. Great, thank you so much. Martin, I have a question then to you. So how your previous backgrounds reflected in what you do now? So, and what is an impact, in your opinion, on your audience?
So my previous background, as I kind of mentioned a little bit in my last answer, physics and math, has made me look for simplicity and for universal laws, if you will, in some way, in a very vexing way, because I'm in a field where no such thing exists. and so, but by being the person in the room who tries to look through the biological variation. There's no such thing as biological variation in physics. There's only experimental variation, whereas in biology, there's both biological variation and experimental variation, and we know sometimes very little about either of those. I think that's helped me be more of a scalpel in the discussions, look for answers that perhaps are a little bit more specific, sometimes not always the appropriate questions, because the fields are obviously very different. And what is the impact of my audience? My main goal in a lot of what I do, not all of what I do, is to try to help scientists explain themselves. Because I think generally they want to do an amazing job, and all science, of course, depends on communication, because we all have to, in some way, as Newton said, stand on the shoulders of giants and continue the science of other people. Science does not start with us. Science has started ever since humanity has been around. Art may start with each of us, but science does not. And so I'm hoping that through, the use of design, teaching people about typography, color, things like this, letting them know that there may be a good reason why you shouldn't use Comic Sans on a poster to communicate your science. I want to save the time of other busy scientists to try to get them to understand faster and get to their science quicker. That's my hope. I'm not sure whether I'm successful in all the cases. I hope to be successful in at least some of the cases.
Very well. Thank you so much. Tomasz, I have a question to you as well. So I think I didn't meet before a person who does a PhD in music. and I was just wondering, how does that look like? So does your actually music help you to be creative in your PhD thesis? And what is about your PhD thesis? Is it the research on composers, or maybe you actually have to create something, I don't know, some great melody or yeah. So if you
it's quite different. Sure. It's quite different within the subspecialties of music, right? So my degree that I just completed, actually all the requirements for, I'm just kind of waiting for the diploma to come in the mail. That's called the Doctor of Musical Arts. It's a very practical kind of degree. It's for performers. It means sort of attaining the highest standard of performance, plus doing a research project related to performance. And so for me, that was an analysis of some rare Polish piano music by Ludomir Różycki, a composer who I encountered while I was in Katowice on my Fulbright, actually. And so, yeah, my project dealt a lot with sort of issues of style and historical position of his work and reception and things like that. So kind of issues that historical musicology typically concerns itself with as a field. And if you kind of type in historical musicology, you'll get sort of the layout of what that means and what it entails. For some people, though, PhD research in music can be quite different. So if you're a composer, your PhD research is a portfolio of compositions, for example. If you're a musicologist, it could be actually anything from like that research of a friend of mine who's researching phonographs and early sound production to I don't know, say the gamelan music in Java or something like that, and doing ethnomusicological research. So it's actually, music is an interesting field in that it pulls from a lot of other disciplines to help its own methodology. And so that way it's both a little disorganized, but it's also a lot of fun.
Okay. And then did I don't know, playing an instrument help you with actually your thesis? I mean,
right. So my research was directly about, the piano compositions of this person. And so playing them obviously allowed me to have more to say about them and to understand them better. I could sort of absorb the music into my own understanding in a very visceral kind of way, which as a performer, I think that's the advantage of being a performer. You really get to live with the art form, not just study it. It's sort of the difference between an art critic and an artist themselves, right? And somebody who studies music as an object and somebody who actually does music and studies it at the same time.
Justyna, could I ask a question that relates to Tom? Because before I was telling about my brother being a scientist doing art, right? I also feel like people like Beethoven, who he said that, I don't know what percentage, I think he said 99% is effort, 1% is genius. And I think that I imagine Beethoven experimenting, constantly doing experiments, one after the other. This sounds better, or this, not just in his hearing, which it wasn't that good, but I guess in his brain. So do you feel, Tom, very much like experimenting when you're creating some music?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the process. Is you have to almost induce creativity at times. I don't think that creativity is this magical unicorn that you just have to just try to find, and sometimes it comes and it does. I think you have to work for it. So for me, that's practicing, and in practicing, you try to create scenarios for yourself, whether that's emotions that you can call up. You have a phrase and play it like it sounds happy, play it like it sounds tragic. What would that mean in terms of the sound? And so really it is play, right? I play the piano, and so then I play around with the sound to mold something.
I think the 99% is an underestimate.
I agree.
Very well. Thank you so much. Marlena.
Yes.
I will have a question to you now.
Okay.
How, if at all, should we keep that in mind when designing education system or university? So what was just discussed, right? So being creative, being persistent, I guess, and keeping in mind that involved in being a scientist and then being a musician, you have to be really creative and resilient, I guess, because not always you feel the strength of doing the experiments or practicing your music, but then you need to produce something, right? So keeping that in mind, how should we be better in designing education system?
This is really a good question, and I moved back to Poland, and I'm a teacher in Poland right now, and I teach art. But I also create a lot of STEAM art projects. I call it innovation design. What I love about the United States is that the STEAM education is really pushed from the top, from the government, right? So there is a lot of, there's a big budget for promoting STEAM at the very early age. And the whole goal, the whole idea of the project is that we have to create people with skills for the future, right? We cannot create a person who's gonna listen and do what is told to do. We have to create a person who is a free thinker, very creative, open-minded, a person who has to learn from different fields and combine the fields together. So I think that that art and science, I think they will have a lot of attention in the future. Like it's happening actually right now. One of my famous saying that I wanna say in here, share with you guys, is by Goethe. It goes like this: thinking is more interesting than knowing, but less interesting than looking. So there's thinking, there's knowing, and there's looking. And I think that what artists are doing and scientists, we are looking for something. We're looking for the patterns, we're looking for solutions. And that's the skills that will be needed for future jobs that will be connected with STEAM, technology, science, engineering, right? So looking and the way of seeing, it will be very important. And here, we artists and scientists, we have a lot of in common that and to offer as well.
Mm-hmm. Very well, thank you so much. Anyone want to add anything to that, actually?
Sure, if I may. So I think science education is not great, but it's not terrible, in the sense that
it is better than it was.
Sorry?
It is better than it was, in my opinion.
well, relative to what we know, it's unclear. I'm not an educator, so this is pure conjecture. But I think what it does not emphasize enough is the art and skill of asking questions. When you go to a conference, what you wish to walk away from is not answers with answers. You wish to walk away with questions, because those are the things that are the most difficult to come up with. Because once you have a question, in a way, the answer is, well, not simple, at least it's much more directed. Whereas questions kind of come up from, in a way, like creativity from seemingly nowhere. But also questions kind of point us in the direction of where we should look in science or in other activities. And I think that the role of art here is to bring that loop of looking, thinking, back to looking kind of through feeling. So we look at the world, we think about what we see, we have some reaction, we feel something. And I think art then lets us do that, lets us express ourselves in how we absorb this information, each on a very different way. And then perhaps that makes us look with maybe fresh eyes out again. So I think that we need to emphasize to students that the world out there is so complicated that if you could just pick being a good question asker or a good answer giver, we need a balance. And it's the question askers that are the bellwethers of everyone else. They set the style, they set the trend. Then come in the answer givers, and then they kind of clean things up and look to the question askers for their next task.
And I may add, we also need listeners, good listeners.
Wait, did I just speak for too long? Is that?
No, all good. I'm just saying that in this picture that you created, I mean, of course, the answers, should be coming from the person that actually listened to the question asked. And I think many times it is, at least, in communication, right, that we are so focused on finding our answer that we are actually not listening to the person that is talking to us. So I think listening is also one of the skills that would be needed. Tomasz.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Yeah, so, I'm coming from a liberal arts kind of perspective, now working at a liberal arts college and having studied at a place that was also very balanced. In my undergraduate at Rice, it was very much place with serious science, but also a lot of humanities alongside, and everybody kind of exchanging ideas. And I don't think that it always is such an explicit exchange, but I think it is one that affects you on a human level. And I think the human level is one that sometimes maybe we don't think about enough when we consider things like research or science, and just the capabilities that we bring as a person very much translate into how you think through a problem. And I think it's no coincidence, for example, that, music majors tend to be the largest group that gets accepted to medical school and things like that. There are these ways of thinking that you might learn in the arts that don't have a direct translation, but they're just, they allow you to access some part of your brain or some way to structure a problem that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily see if you were trained along another line. And so it's hard to sometimes quantify that and put it into a sort of a direct relationship, other than like these kinds of statistics, or, lots of, for example, musicians become programmers, excellent computer scientists and things like that. But that's not to say that that we should forget this very old idea, actually, of the balanced human being and the pursuit of knowledge being happening across many different disciplines, then eventually helping you to do one job better because you know how to do several different kinds of ways of thinking.
Yes, and coming back to the brain, I mean, and that's another thing, right? I mean, I think music really helps to develop the brain. I mean, my daughter is also, play piano, and I always keep telling her that that's why she's so good with languages, because, she's using her brain quite a lot. And I fully agree here. I think, I have also a colleague who was a musician, and she was, I think, in her 40s when she decided to do a PhD in neuroscience, and she succeeded. She was really excellent. And so I think this is very true. That music does really help, and not only music, I mean, can be sport or anything else, right? But I think that the richer I think our growing up is could really influence us as a human being, and we can become someone that we didn't expect that we want to become, right? Not everyone knows, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a musician. Sometimes it just develops through the years, right? And I think arts and science is really helpful. And what you just said here, right? And an education system, I think us as parents or as colleagues and as teachers, I think we have to all remember that we should give an example and stop sometimes and think how better we could pass on younger generations all these values and qualities that we think we would need when we were younger. So yes, that's excellent. Thank you so much for your answers. I would have last, I think, question to Jose, and then we will open that to the audience. We are in the times, I think, that many people find it also difficult to trust scientists, right? There is lots of doubts about the statistics, I don't know, the reality of paper being published and data being there. So do you think that art can actually help building trust in science?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, to the extent that it can help us to communicate better what we do to other people, right? Actually, I do most of the figures of my papers. I made them myself because my brother has the luxury of doing art all the time, and I don't get the chance to do it too much. But at least when I make the papers, right, I spend a lot of time making nice figures. Partly is because of the aesthetics, but partly is because it's easier to communicate to other scientists. But that's the first step, to other scientists that may not be so knowledgeable about your own area. And then beyond that, of course, if you want to reach people that are not scientists, I think it's tremendously important to find ways. And some are visual, of course, right? So nice cartoons, nice drawings, or whatever you can do to communicate, but also explaining things. So writing, I think there are many different outreach. One thing I have been dreaming of doing, because my mother only went to school for 3 months, but she learned a lot of things reading because she loved reading. And I've been thinking of writing a book called Science for My Mother, where I would put all the knowledge that I have, because I studied chemistry, organic chemistry, and theoretical physics, but I've been working in neuroscience and biology. So I have a little bit of, and I would like to put this, in a way that a person like my mother could understand. So I think the more we communicate with the non-scientists, the better, and all the communication will be based on some ways that can be related to art.
Very well, thank you. And maybe Marty, what about you? What do you think about that? Can art help us trust in science?
Well, that is a rich topic, and one has to be very careful in not going off the rails and ranting about the current state of the distrust in science. I think that we have as scientists, we have to come up with good metaphors, or at least we have to not come up with really, really bad metaphors. I think that there is the wrong way that the public understands the process of science. I think most people see science as a body of knowledge, whereas it is not. It is really a process. The body of knowledge may change, but the process of hypothesis making, testing, model making, predicting does not change. There are some really bad metaphors out there. I work in a genome center, and the typical metaphor is that the genome is a blueprint. And of course, I make it my life mission to try to destroy that metaphor, because it is nothing like a blueprint. In fact, the reason why genetics and genomics is so difficult is that when you look at a genome, you have no idea what it's going to create. You don't know what the thing looks like. Whereas when you look at a blueprint, it's like that's a house. So automatically, it's completely wrong. It's also called the Book of Life and things like this, but none of these are actually quite true. In cancer, in the field of cancer, we often have these fundraising events. Some of them are called the Weekend to End Breast Cancer, or the Weekend for the Cure, things like this, things to help people, motivate them to participate, to help with research. But of course, a disease like cancer cannot be ended on a weekend, nor, I would say, can it be ended at any time. It's a complicated statement. And I think if we hint to people that there is such a thing as a cure, then it's natural that they will become disappointed. But it's because we're not expressing the complexity of the problem. And I think that people do not care to know how complicated some of the problems are and how much effort it takes to come up with some of the answers. And they're wary. They don't have the patience for it. They wish these answers to be arrived at within their lifetime. And while we know now more than before, there are things that continue to be unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. And people do not take well to questions that they may pose themselves that in fact are unanswerable. So it's complicated.
Yes, I fully agree. I mean, same the drawings, the figures, but you just mentioned, right, the writing and the language, right? How do we put the sentence together that is actually translate the science or the truth and doesn't make it, sound easy, right? And just as you just mentioned, right, with the cancer example of, cure the cancer for the weekend. Yeah, that's something that I think that wasn't advertised well.
Right.
Exactly. Okay, so maybe we have some questions from the audience. I would then open the panel for further discussions. And if you guys like, you can put your questions in the chat, or actually you can unmute yourself. And or if there are lots of questions, then please raise your hand, and then I will ask you to speak up. Do we have any questions in the chat? I don't see. Everyone is very quiet today.
Someone needs to break the ice.
Don't be shy.
I think we have Kasia Makoska.
Kasia, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the discussions, and it's really interesting to hear the different viewpoints that I'm not used to hearing so often, unfortunately. But it's really great to hear them today. And I was struck by this comparison that Tom made, I think, about the sort of analogies of both science and research and music and arts being understood without having to speak the same language and so on. So I guess my question is, do you think, how to say, because there is this potential of speaking to each other across cultures or maybe across nationalities like we are, do you think the sort of science diplomacy or diplomacy more broadly, is this a role for scientists or for artists who already have their plates full? How do you think we should be putting our 2 cents into that, where, for example, we are failed by governments or politicians? Is there a role for us there, even though we're already, under a lot of pressure in our own jobs, or do you think researchers and artists should stick to their own things and leave that to someone else?
Well, of course, it's difficult to sort of make time for any external collaboration that might prove to be difficult to set up. But, I guess I would begin by saying, I think everybody would understand each other better if they could make some music together first. And what I mean by that is, the idea that you can get together with somebody you don't know and share something together that right away puts you in a common space, allows you to then have a personal relationship with that person. And I think out of that personal relationship come collaborations. And the science colleagues here can speak more to that. And I understand there are all kinds of issues with funding, and sometimes there are just personal issues about thinking about your own field and maybe your own research and trying to protect that a little bit and so forth. But I think, in terms of advocacy, we can certainly pull our brains together and say, well, listen, we're on the same team for this particular issue. Let's figure out a way that we can campaign for whatever goal it is that we're trying to achieve. I think government funding and things like that are probably an issue to complain about in all fields, right? So musicians in America, we often complain about no support from the government in terms of the arts, and perhaps that's also an issue for certain science fields. And maybe there are fundraisers that could be organized. Maybe there are international opportunities. Maybe this kind of research doesn't happen in this country, but it happens in another country. And so I think it's important to create personal relationships that will last, that then can create something meaningful over time, and it is an investment. So I agree. You have to have the kind of personality that would first want to make such an investment. But once you have that to begin with, then you can find a way to work together. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Kasia, are you satisfied? Thanks a lot. Okay, yes. Yes, she is. She just wrote. Any more questions from the audience? I don't see any more. So maybe I will have a question then to one of you, one more question. Marlena, what do you think? What was the subject actually in school that helped you to decide to become an artist or visual artist? Did you know that already when you were younger, or actually this came with time?
You know what? I have a weird fascination with things that I am not familiar with. So at age of 14, I have realized that I don't know anything about art. So I started learning art history and different art techniques, and then decided to go to art school. So that was my first humble beginning of art school, and I have gone to art school for 11 years. How I started my journey with science was very interesting, because I was invited to work with a mathematician on a project about dimensions. And the funny thing is that this project actually inspired me to study architecture. So then I just realized if art project could inspire me to study such a beautiful field as like architecture, how I could use the art to inspire other people to do, interesting things.
Okay.
If I may say, I think architecture is a very good example of art and science. Right.
But a mathematician inspired me to do that. Like, I wasn't thinking of architecture before, right? So I have to, experience the pure science. And actually, mathematics is very graceful if it comes to that, because it's it's abstract thinking, right? So I think artists and mathematicians, I think they have a lot of things in common, right? It's just that the abstract thinking, how you see and understand the world.
There is a lot of beauty in mathematics, a lot. But also there is in any part of research that you do, you constantly find beauty everywhere. So.
I teach art in Poland right now, and I always tell my students, like, if you love art, you have to love mathematics first.
But I think if to add to this, we have to be very careful, because while those trained in mathematics understand the beauty of it, we may all agree that Euler's equation is the most beautiful equation. When speaking to a stranger at a party, you might find it difficult to persuade them that that is in fact the case. And so the word beauty there is a complicated thing, isn't it? And it's not accessible. And I think that there's a whole bunch of beauties out there that are not accessible to many people of all sorts, for everyone. Right? There's beauty in music that I'm not familiar with. There's beauty in math others are not familiar with. And if we can do more to unearth those, I think that's a good process, right? We take the most beauty we can with us to our grave.
Yeah, of course, some of the beauty can be shared more easily, right? I think Beethoven's Ninth, most people like that, right?
Well, so I challenge you to, as a sequel to the Science for Your Mother book, to write up the shortest explanation of why Euler's equation is the most beautiful equation to a non-mathematician, or to your mother. To your mother, make it a chapter.
I know. Yeah, just the derivative of e to the x equals e to the x. That's just so amazingly beautiful. Yeah.
That's very true. What about you, Jose? So what actually, did you always know that you want to be a scientist?
Actually, a little bit, yeah. So I used to love the Fantastic Four, my brother and me. Actually, someone is asking. My brother wants to say something, so we can invite him to say something later. But basically, we both of us were very interested in math, and we like. But I really like chemistry. When I studied chemistry, I love chemistry. And then reading these Marvel comics books. This Fantastic Four guy, the head of them was a biochemist. So I said, I want to be a biochemist. But later I got really obsessed with chess. And for a while, I just didn't want to do anything. And eventually I said, okay, I'll go to college. And then when I started to do research is when I really saw that was my calling. So I was good with the chemistry and math and so on, but I like to learn. I like knowledge. Mm-hmm. And with the arts, I actually could have gone into arts if I didn't have a twin brother who was a little better than me initially. And so I loved art. My family has many more artists than scientists. I'm the only scientist, but many artists. And what happened is that we were both pretty good, but he was always a little better. And I never had any bad feelings about that. I didn't feel jealous, but I didn't feel encouraged to go in that direction, So.
I just read in the chat that actually your brother joined.
Yeah, he's the Rizo-Rey. So if you want him, we can ask him to. Luis, si me sents? Vols posar el vídeo? I'm sorry, I'm speaking Catalan. He can speak some English, okay? Maybe he's not hearing.
Okay. Maybe she just showed up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now. We can hear you, but we don't see you.
I don't know how I have to make for okay. But
now we're seeing you.
Just a moment.
Now we're gonna have actually speaker.
All right.
Okay.
He has the big light behind.
The problem for that my English is not good. I understand something, but many words I lose. It's very difficult for me understand the conversation. I
can translate.
So Jose actually mentioned that you are an artist in the family. So it's very interesting to see that, a twin brother being a scientist and the other one being an artist. But I guess you are both actually artists, I would say, because I think each of the scientists, I think, deep in themselves, I mean, as we just mentioned, right, they have to be creative to create something I would say fascinating for their audiences, right? So I think this is interesting. And what I wanted to add, I don't see any more questions coming from the audience. Then maybe we can take time and just maybe summarize a bit what we discussed today. So we discussed the interface between the arts and science, and I think it appeared that actually at the end, the language of arts and science are not that different, and actually science and art supports each other. I think every scientist or those scientists that can actually take pleasure from art, either it's music or paintings, I think they enrich their creativity and become better in what are they doing. We also spoke about having influencing younger generations, teaching. Some of you are actually, I mean, all of you are actually doing teachings and trying to project how to be a better scientist, how to be better artists. And Martin, you are an excellent example of a scientist that converts science into art. And Marlena, you are actually an artist who works with scientists and help them to project what they want to translate and project to the bigger audiences. And Tomasz, I think you create music, you're an excellent musician, and I think this is something that the world needs. I hope that people will continue play instruments and not only, you know, sitting with their phones and and playing games. I think these are also very challenging times, and it's great to see that there are people still who really have a passion for it and desire, and I hope that you're going to be spreading that into the world and show people how important that is. Jose, you are also a great scientist and with a passion, and I'm really happy to see that you also interact with artists, actually, with your close brother, and then that in this way, I think you also, I think it helps you also in every day to be excited about science, to be creative. And at the end, I think I would like to ask you to also summarize a bit and maybe to our audience share with them what for three are the three most important actually skills that one can have to take into consideration that would be common for both art and science. And what would you recommend to your younger self?
Well, I think to me, more than a skill, the number one thing is resilience and persistence. It's just whatever your talent doesn't reach, the rest is effort. And we've talked about this with my brother many times and come up to the same conclusion. And I can tell you, Ramonica Hall says the same thing. So more than a skill, number one is just effort. And then, of course, the other ones is, I think there are different disciplines have different skill sets that are more useful. So I think if there is one thing is really common, is effort. But then in terms of the effect that this has on people, it's also feelings, right? So everything can make you feel. And I think that if you enjoy what you're doing, then you can be really good at it, right? So one is effort, but enjoying. And I mean, in my case, I'm a scientist and I love, when I'm doing science, but if I listen to Beethoven, I'm having also fantastic feelings. And if I finish the last 60 pages of Les Miserables, if you read Les Miserables, right, the last 60 pages, just crying and crying, I would have such a hard time, saying which one I prefer of those three. It's just impossible for me. Anyway, so maybe enjoyment and effort.
Okay, two. And one more. I said three.
No, maybe someone else can help me.
Okay, you give two. Okay, that's fine. So, Martin, what about you?
I might give a slightly controversial answer. So I would say existential angst, insight, and intensity. I think existential angst is all that we are, and I think we turn to science to solve some of this angst, and then we turn to art to deal with this bits that science cannot solve. And I think that to speak to a question that was previously posed, should we weigh in on topics that are perhaps outside of our purview? I think at all times. I think that we should seek insight and share with others the insight that has been hard-won by us. And we should do so with intensity. We should show up to conversations that are important and worth having, and we should participate in them. I think that we need that of one another, and I think that is what keeps us going. And maybe just to finish off, there is this one quote by Chandler, which I use quite a lot because I think it connects the topics. And he said that the truth of art keeps science from becoming inhuman, and the truth of science keeps art from becoming ridiculous. Which is a wonderful, wonderful way, at least for me to finish up.
Very well. Thank you so much. Tomasz.
Thanks, Martin, for that amazing quote. Yeah, I absolutely, I love that, and I agree with it. Yeah, for me, it's also, the primary thing, even though we're all so super specialized, it's still never forgetting your humanity in whatever it is that you do. Humanity in your work. I'm a human being first. I'm an artist second, and I'm a musician third, and trying to keep those in line I think is very important, and I think it makes you better at each one. So kind of figuring out your priorities in that very personal way will also just make you more successful in all the endeavors that you do specifically to art or science. And then I think study, just never really stopping to learn, because there's so much to know, as we all know here. For me in music, the study is infinite. There's nearly not enough time for 100 lifetimes to learn all the things I could learn about music and all the music that I could be playing. And yet it's so beautiful and so wonderful. And you always open up new connections and new avenues when you continue to study. And then, keeping a broad perspective, I would say. So just zooming out a lot of the time, going back in to do your study, but then zooming out and, reading a book, going out for coffee, and remembering to continue to be a real person, have a conversation, talk to somebody you don't know anything about, ask them what it is that they're thinking about. You'll be surprised what kinds of ideas you can sometimes apply. I find this with my artistic colleagues all the time, people from theater, from voice, or other arts, for example, or even literature. Just the way they think about certain problems helps me to sometimes solve a musical problem or way to approach something that I'm working on. So those would be my three, I guess, things that I would pay attention to, even if whatever discipline you're doing.
Wonderful. And Marlena, we're coming to you.
I think the most important thing for me is the ability to listen openly and respectfully. So that would be number one, the respect, like you have to respect other people you work with and yourself as well. Curiosity. And I have a fourth one, never grow up or get younger with your kids. I think that the young spirit, it's actually, that's the engine that takes you farther.
I like this one very much. I think the kid within us shouldn't, let's say, die. We are getting older, but I think deep inside we can always be children and learn actually a lot from it, or just remember when you were a kid, how curious and ready to do things and persistent you were in things. Okay, I think with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time and the stories you shared with us today. I think this was really great to hear and see real examples of artists and scientists. And I wish all of you all the best in your future endeavors, wherever you are. Tomasz with your PhD, Martin with your, science and art, that it will be well taken by the audience and they can learn a lot from you. And I know that your website is excellent, so I will advise people to go and visit it. And going back to Tomasz, I think it would be great to hear you play at some point. So maybe in one of the events we can actually have you and you could play some of your either your music or someone else. I think this would be really, really great to have. Marlena, and I think I also don't know your artwork, but I think it would be really nice to see that. So maybe you can share with us with Polonium some of your art, and we can share it, or a little bit help you to be out of the world, or in Poland doing the teaching, or maybe you do some courses that could be interesting for our Polonium network audience. We can follow up with you on that. And Jose, I wish you still that you stay as you are. I mean, with your science and discoveries, everything the best. So thank you so much, all.